Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning. In this class, beginning today, we're going to start a study of Deuteronomy, and you're going to think, what happened to the preacher? He's disconnected here, because we're going to start in the book of Exodus. But really, when you talk about Deuteronomy, you're talking about the life of Moses. You're talking about Moses from the time, really, of the departure from Sinai forward, mostly, although there's some intermingling of course, the law from Sinai, and he'll relate that. He's going to talk about a lot of things like that. The book of Deuteronomy itself we'll give a better introduction to at the end of next week's lesson. But for today, we want to begin to look at the birth of a deliverer. Moses was God's chosen deliverer. He understood that at an early age before most anybody else did. I'm not sure about his mama. I've wondered about that because of his thinking as he goes along. We're going to see that as we study this passage. So look with me to begin with, the book of Exodus, chapter 1. And it starts out, and by the way, the Hebrew name of a book is usually the opening words. That's it. They just call it by the opening words, whatever those are. So in this case, it's now, these are the names. And that would be, that's the title of the Hebrew book that we call the book of Exodus. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So the opening part of the book gives us a quick update on where we are. The book of Genesis closes, obviously, with Joseph still alive. He knows he's going to die. He makes arrangements for his body at that point in time. And then the book closes out. It closes out really with his death, a coffin in Egypt. What an interesting... Here's the book of beginnings. The title of that book would be In the Beginning, because those are the opening words of the book of Genesis, and yet it closes with a coffin in Egypt. And somebody might say, wow, the book of beginnings ends with a coffin? But the reality is that coffin is a signal of another great beginning, the beginning of the deliverance of God's people to the promised land, and them living there as a people for his name. So the coffin anticipates that, even though it's kind of an odd way of doing it. So it's a beginning, but not the one you'd normally look for when you think about it. So Joseph died, of course. We know that from the end of Genesis. All of his brothers died. That whole generation was gone. But the children of Israel just continued to increase. They became a very, very mighty, a very strong nation. Then we discover this statement. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. This king didn't know Joseph. Why? Well, historically speaking, we may be looking at a totally different line of kings. It is thought by some, at least, that Joseph ruled in the land of Egypt as governor under the Pharaoh, that he ruled in the period of the Hyksos, that Egypt had been invaded and was being controlled by a different group of people. And so no wonder, a Pharaoh would arise who didn't know Joseph, because Egypt took back over its own rule. And their rulers were their rulers at the point that we're talking about now. That may be the answer. But whatever the case may be, We have a Pharaoh now that doesn't know what Joseph did. He doesn't appreciate the role that the Jews played, the descendants of Isaac, and therefore the descendants of Jacob or Israel, as we often know him. They don't know the role that these people played in saving the Egyptians. If it hadn't been for Joseph, many of them would have starved to death. Maybe the nation would have been wiped out. We don't know. Because Joseph was God's instrument to save many people alive. Not just the Israelites, although certainly he did that, but also the Egyptians and many other people were saved alive because of the work of Joseph. So this Pharaoh comes along, he doesn't know him, he doesn't respect what he did, and so what does he think? And he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and go up out of the land." So he sees this growing multitude of people within his own boundaries as a threat. They're a threat. And in wartime in that era, it wouldn't have been unusual for one part of a nation, especially if they were foreigners, which of course these Israelites were, in certain senses of the word, wouldn't be unusual for them to join forces with an enemy and overthrow the people where they stayed. And then they would have left the land of Egypt. So he says, let's deal shrewdly with them. A different way to put it would be, let's deal with them craftily. Let's be a little bit devious here. Let's be sly in what we do and take full advantage of this situation. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Okay, they're growing. They're growing very, very strong. The Egyptian theory here is we're going to turn them into slaves, and we're going to work them so hard that they'll be too tired to have children. I'm trying to be a little delicate here. Too tired to have children. Well, it didn't work that way. The harder they worked, the more children they had was the result. And I'm not go into why that was a possibility, except God's working. That I do know. And they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and the Egyptians don't know what to do with it. Now, here is the observation, and you see it on my notes here. Man cannot circumvent God's plans. You can think you can. You may think you can outthink God. No, you're not going to do it. Pharaoh had a great plan, but it wasn't God's plan, and so it failed. It's just putting it quite simply. It failed. And we need to see that. We need to see it for our own sake. Because sometimes I think we forget this. When we look around us and we see that the world seems to be winning the victory. Seem like they've got the best side. And even the singer of Israel saw that. And he was ready he said, my feet had well nigh slipped. I just about fell down. Looking at the way that the wicked were surviving. He said, until I went into the house of the Lord. Well, you got to realize that the Lord is there, and if we'll keep turning to Him, He's going to win the victory no matter what, despite the planning of other people. So pick up at verse 15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools. If it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. And so the plan is, well, we're going to fix this. We're going to make sure that they don't have a bunch of men for an army. Now, this is a little bit short-sighted if you're looking at it from the point of wanting to keep slaves. Because if you run out of men, eventually you run out of people. It takes a man and a woman, to have children. And so it's a little bit short-sighted. It's kind of ironic that we live in an era when something similar has gone on. In the case of China, it was enforced by the government. You could only have one child. Well, guess what? China's population is on a steep decline now. This is something, and now the government is actually incentivizing, if you have more than one child, they'll give you money, to have them. See, so they've come into a problem. Did you know that the United States and all of Europe is having a negative birth rate? Now, we're going down, not up, in terms of size. We may have reached the peak of how many people are going to be alive in the world. That's a possibility. So sometimes, our wonderful plans that we have are not quite sensible in the long run. Short run sounds very good. But this is his plan. We're going to kill the boy babies when they're on the birth stool. When they first come out, we're going to kill them. And how do the midwives respond to that? Pick up at verse 17. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them." Well, I wonder now about this part of it. Is this a lie? Or is this the truth? Well, it may be a mixture, to be honest about it. The Egyptian women apparently just kind of laid around, didn't do anything. So they were not physically very, very strong or healthy. So they struggled to give birth. The Hebrew women, in contrast to that, were right out there with their husbands, working. And they were working hard, and they were, very, very active. So it's possible that at least some of them had children, without the midwife even being present. She may have just come in after the fact. That's a possibility. But more likely, these midwives have told a lie. God does not approve of the lie, but He does give them a blessing. Why? Because this does what He wants done. This saves His people. And I think that's all we can assume there. And so we find from that point, verse 20, "Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mightily." He dealt well with them, not because they lied, if they did, but instead He dealt well with them because they achieved His end. His people were growing, and that's what mattered to Him. And God blessed them because of that. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that He provided households for them. So their families grew as a result of their standing with God. They were blessed because of that. Now, really, verse 22 of Exodus chapter 1 begins to enter into the beginning of chapter 2. And I've mentioned this in some of my other classes. The biblical divisions of chapters and verses are not original with the original document. They're not there. The documents were written more like we might write a letter. There were no chapter divisions. There were no verse divisions. And whoever, and we do have an idea, in the 1500s, when they began to print the Bibles, they chose to put chapters and verses in. but whoever divided them doesn't always do a good job. So I would have put verse 22 of Exodus chapter 1 into chapter 2, because it really goes more nearly with chapter 2. Here's what it says. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So he wants slaves. There's no doubt about that. He needs the slaves, slave labor. But he doesn't want them to grow strong numerically as a potential army. So kill all the boys. How are you going to do it? Throw them in the river. Then along comes a special man and his wife. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. Why? You know, there's a biblical answer to that question. It says, she says in the text, says, his beautiful child. But I want to turn with me, if you will, to the book of Hebrews for just a minute. Hebrews chapter 11. The writer of Hebrews is giving what we sometimes describe as the hall of faith. And he comes to a statement that at first glance sounds like he's commending the faith of Moses, but I want everybody to listen closely and observe that it's not really the faith of Moses that we're talking about here. Verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. So who hid the child by faith? Well, it wasn't Moses. He wasn't the one that had the faith. Now, his faith's going to be talked about, sure enough, in the next verse or two here in Hebrews 11. But at this point, the people that had faith were Amram and Jochebed. That's who had faith. Now, you got to wonder, how does that work? We've already observed in other classes at other times that faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. That's Romans chapter 10, verse 17. So if faith comes by hearing, what did they hear? What did God say? Well, I don't know that entirely. He may have said, don't kill your children. That's a possibility. He may have said, ignore the command of Pharaoh. That's another possibility. What did he say? Well, I don't really know. All I know is that Amram and Jochebed acted by faith, that they responded to the will of God, and they kept this young man alive until he was 3 months old. Okay, some of you in here have either children or grandchildren. What begins to happen at about 3 months old? What? Start crying. Yeah. They become a little more boisterous. They're a little more, and they're a little more active, and they just get more and more so that way. Thus, Owen, sometimes looks like he's about to pull his hair out. That's the way it goes. Leanne too. I've seen it on occasion. That's the way it goes. Busy, constantly active, and it begins to be hard to hide them. To be honest. So 3 months, and then here comes the irony. She actually obeys the king's command. Now, not in the way you'd expect it. She finds a loophole. He said, throw him in the river. She's going to throw him in the river. That's exactly what she's going to do. But let's look and see how that transpires, verses 3 and 4. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him and daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and lay it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. She threw him in the river, but she threw him in a basket, an ark made of bulrushes. Okay. I've told you in days gone by about how they formed their paper. In that era, they would take a reed, a bulrush, that kind of thing, and they would cut it in half, and then they would take layers off and lay it, crosswise and form basically paper, something to write on. That's what they did. Well, they also would take these things and they would interweave them, and they could make baskets out of them. If you've ever been to certain places in the world, you may have participated in that. I'll never forget going to Hawaii, and we stumbled on a celebration of some Hawaiian people, and they invited us to just join in to the celebration. And Teresa was invited to join the women, and they took palm fronds and they interwove them and made a basket. And we still got the basket, and it's probably not as strong today as it was then. It's dried out a little bit. But that's what they would do with these bulrushes. They would interweave them and make a basket out of them. And then she waterproofed it. She waterproofed it by putting pitch, as it's called here. Asphalt is the other word that's used. In other words, she uses a sticky substance, at least at first, inside and out. And when it dries, well, then it's not going to let the water in. It's going to be a waterproof vessel for the baby. Then she puts the baby in the reeds by the riverbank. Why the riverbank? What would happen at the riverbank if you didn't have your typical, jacuzzi to get your morning bath in? People go down there to bathe. They go to the river to bathe. And now I've got a lot of questions when I get to heaven about what goes on here. It's my suspicion that the Jochebed knew where Pharaoh's daughter took her bath every day. That's my suspicion. I can't prove that. And don't go away and say, Gary said that she knew exactly. No, I didn't say that. I just said it's my suspicion that she knew where the Pharaoh's daughter took her bath every morning. She put that ark nearby. Now, she may also have known that Pharaoh's daughter didn't have children. Why is that important? Well, no heir. No heir to the throne. If this is his daughter and she has no children, then who's going to inherit at that point? I don't know that, but again, those are things I've thought. And, I've got a list of things I'd like to ask when I get to heaven. And this is on the list. Tell me about it. This is not high on the list, but it's curiosity. I'd like to know, what happened there. And then you got Miriam, not designated by name here, just called their daughter. But she's positioned to watch what happens to the baby boy. And again, you've got to wonder, did her mama say, now, if they find this baby and it looks like they're going to keep him, then, they're going to need a wet nurse. Because you couldn't run to the local Kroger and get infant formula. And a woman that didn't have the child would not be immediately ready to feed the child. Again, I'm trying to be delicate, but you get the point. And so, when Pharaoh's daughter found the baby, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to find out what's going to happen. So pick up now at verse 5 of chapter 2. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I'll give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." There's actually quite a bit there to think about. First of all, the baby's crying. Could that be providential? You say, babies cry. Okay, I understand that. But this baby cries almost on cue. Again, the text doesn't tell me. I don't know. But here's what I do know about women versus men. You give a man a baby and it starts to cry and he looks to give it away. Very few men want to hold a crying baby. But the women, on the other hand, are more compassionate. They respond to that. Oh, this poor child, what does it need? Is the way they think. So is this providential? Well, I don't know. Could be. It could be providential. That as the baby sees the light of day, begins to cry, that's the opportunity for the compassion of Pharaoh's daughter to come into play. And it does come into play. She is a very intelligent woman. She rightly deduces this is a Hebrew child. She's supposed to be throwing this baby in the river, and she's done it. Done it her way, but she's done it. It's one of her children, one of the Hebrew children there. Have you ever wondered, did she anticipate, did she guess that Miriam is the sister of this baby? She may have. It wouldn't surprise me. If she's perceptive enough to figure out where this baby came from, she may also have been perceptive enough to figure out, I may be getting an offer from this child's mother. But now, here comes the part that every modern mother would love to hear. They're going to pay me to raise my own children. Because that's exactly what happens, right? Pharaoh's daughter said, yes, I need a wet nurse. Yes, bring this woman on. Now, what opportunities present themselves because Moses' mama is allowed to bring him up? What opportunities are there? Do what now? Yes, she can influence him toward God. She can teach him in the family. We don't know everything she taught him, but I do know this. As we go on in this story, we're going to see that Moses knows who his people are. And it's not the Egyptians. That's not who he focuses on. He could have been ruler in the land of Egypt. And believe me, the next couple of verses are going to show he was brought up, he was trained perhaps to be the next Pharaoh. But he doesn't choose the Egyptian people. He chooses God's people. They're suffering. That's okay. He joins them in their suffering, which, by the way, the Hebrew writer then goes on and talks about. He talks about he chose to suffer with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So thereby, the great riches of Egypt are depicted as the pleasures of sin in that fashion. So she names him. She names him Moses. We know that name. Do you know what it means? Well, it means draws out or brought forth. So she drew him out of the river. That's his name, draw out. Now, isn't it interesting that name actually applies to his future life? He's going to draw the people of God out of the land of Egypt. So it really is a name that applies for his entire lifetime and actually grows more important, not less important, as he goes along. But that's the way that lays out. By the way, Stephen in Acts chapter 7 deals with this story as well. Of course, he's talking to the Jewish leaders of his day. He's telling them the history of Israel in brief, telling them very quickly. And here's the way he put it, verses 21, 22. But when he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. So this fella he's in line. He's ready to go to be the next Pharaoh. At least so it appears. But now, go back to the text and pick up at verse 11 of Exodus chapter 2. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way. And when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Please notice that twice in this text it says brethren. Who does he see as his brethren? It's not Egyptians, it's the Israelites. So has Mama done a good job? I'd say yes. I'd say she's got it down pretty well. And she serves as a challenge to all of us in the Lord's church today. Do your children, do they know who God's people are? Do they know who ought to be the brethren, if they become Christians? And the answer to that should be yes. We ought to make sure they're familiar with the people of God and they have great association with them. Certainly Moses did because of his mother. So pick up at verse 13. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. He said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? And he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. Not really a sidelight, but I want us to observe something. Moses looked this way and that way, and he didn't see anybody, and so he thought he could get away with it. Yeah, that might ought to serve as a warning to all of us. You can look around and think nobody's seeing, and minimally speaking, I can promise you God always sees. Invariably, God sees. And so, we need to remember that. Moses thought he was undetected. Well, that didn't prove to be true, did it? An Israelite saw him, and that Israelite turns out to be, at this point in time, would you say his nemesis? I'd say that Israelite proves to be an agent of God. Moses needs to grow up as a leader. Oh, he knows how to lead the greatest nation on the earth at the time. He knows how to do that. He knows how to rule over Egypt, but does he know how to lead God's people? There's a difference. There's quite a difference. Pharaoh leads by, basically with an iron fist. Think about the way he's treated the Israelite people. But God's leader is going to have to rule with compassion. Does Moses know compassion? Well, we're not so sure yet, are we? In the text, we have no reason to believe he knows compassion. And so it looks to me like God uses this fella to advance the cause that he has in the future in his mind. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. When the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Okay, so Moses is there, he's by the well, and he protects these young women because he sees what the shepherds are doing to them. Now, do you think this was a new thing for the shepherds? The girls had filled the troughs, and isn't it interesting that they wait till they fill the troughs and then they drive them away? Well, then the shepherds don't have to fill the troughs to water their sheep, do they? It's already been done for them. Now, why do you think that I think that this was an everyday occurrence? Well, let's look at the text. Go a little bit further in the text. Begin at verse 18. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you've come so soon today?" Now, do you ever see why I suspect that this was a daily habit? That the shepherds were in the habit of letting the girls draw the water and then driving them away? It's because Dad says, "How'd you get here so early?" We do it. We have the similar thing. If you have to come through the stacks at a certain time of day, to get home from work, and you get home early, my wife might say, "Well, what happened to you today? How'd you get here so soon?" Were the stacks empty, when you came through there? Well, anyway, that's what seems to happen. And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." Now, why do they call him an Egyptian? What's your best guess? We don't know, but what's your best guess? That's the way he's dressed. Yeah, he dressed like an Egyptian. And I'm going to make another observation for us. Folks can tell something about who you are by how you dress. It's a little bit disturbing to me, and I don't see, there's nobody in this audience today I'm speaking about, not a one of you, so don't take it that way, but just think about it. A little bit disturbing to me when our young ladies and our young men look like the world. And, modern clothing, I've been told, I've heard how hard it is to buy modest clothing right now. It's very difficult. What are you going to do about it? Well, I know what Teresa's solution was. She got a sewing machine. She made clothing for her and for Tabitha too. That's the solution. She still makes clothing, by the way, for herself. So you could do it that way. What about the fellas? You say, fellas don't have that. Oh, yes, they do. Oh, no doubt about it. You see some of these things that they wear to ride a bike in. I mean, it doesn't leave much to the imagination, from my point of view. And a fella can be immodest just like a woman can. And we don't need to look like the world. We're different. We're distinct. They thought he was an Egyptian. Why? That's the way he dressed. Well, of course it was. That's where he came from. Okay, so go ahead. So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." See, so hey, what's the courteous thing to do here, girls? You left that man back there at the well? Go get him and invite him in. And that's what happens. And Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. She bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Okay, now a couple of things to notice. First of all, this fellow's called Reuel, which means friend of God. Is that his name, or is it more of a title? And I don't know the answer to that. Let me explain why. Because later, many years later, Moses is going to have contact again with Reuel. And, if you just go into ordinary time of life, you wonder, is this the same guy? Well, not necessarily. If it's more nearly a title, and a different name will also be mentioned for him as well. So it may be more like a title within the family or something that he has friend of God, maybe the family designation. I won't say a last name, but something on that order maybe. Gershom, the name of his first son is banishment from, literally, and it could be rendered a stranger there. I don't know that some of these names these children get, I think, well, they're appropriate for what was going on at the time, but would you want to be known as stranger there for the rest of your life? I don't know. Whether I would or I wouldn't. It kind of reminds me of the little story they tell about a fellow whose mother named him Odd. And he just hated that name, hated it. He just wouldn't let anybody call him by that name. And before he died, he told his children, I don't want my name put on the tombstone because I don't like that name. And so, people come up to the tombstone, they'd see it, it'd have a date of birth, date of death, but no name. And they'd always say, that's odd. So he didn't escape it, did he? Okay. Names are significant in Scripture, and we want to pick up on that. That's what's going on here. So a stranger there. That's all right. Pick up again, verse 23. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage. They cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So harsh treatment from the Egyptians made them feel that God had forgotten them. And so when it says God remembered, it doesn't mean in the way you and I remember, like, oh, me, I forgot. No, not that at all. Instead, it comes to a point in time where God says, basically, it's time to fulfill my promise. That's what the idea behind the word remembered is. He had told Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, he had told Abraham that his people would be treated in a bad way for 400 years. Guess how long they've been here? Well, just, right in that ballpark, 400 years. So God remembered right when he said he would remember. That's the whole point. So pick up now at chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Please, first of all, observe that here his name is Jethro. Elsewhere it was Ruel, friend of God. So again, I wonder if that's a family title. I'm not sure. Or was he some kind of a priest of God? I don't know. Possibility that is true. Kyle and Delitzsch, who are the good Old Testament commentators, say that Horeb is not a single mountain. Instead, it's a set of mountains. It's like saying the Smokies or something like that, or the Rockies. We can identify with that. It's in the southern part of the peninsula there. And notice it says the back of the desert. Well, in Israelite mind, the front is where? Well, the front is east. It's in front of you, and the back would be the west side. So where is he? Well, he's kind of toward Egypt. If you go down in that peninsula, he's toward the Egyptian side in the middle of the mountains. Is where he is at that particular time. And what's happening? He's learning to lead God's people. How? By caring for a flock. Not by using a whip. If he'd been taking care of cattle, might have had to have a whip. But no, to lead God's people, he needs to be prepared by being a shepherd. All right, pick up verse 2. And the angel of the Lord, please, in your mind at least, underline that. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord, please underline that again in your mind at least, the Lord, and notice it is capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Therefore, it's the Tetragrammaton. It's YHWH, and putting it in English, which is, we don't know what it is. Is it Yahweh or Yihweh, or what is it? Well, we don't exactly know, because the Jews wouldn't say it. So we lost the way to pronounce the word. But what I do know is this is the name of God. So the angel of the Lord is God. But is he God the Father? No, my answer is he's probably God the Son. This is Jesus before he came to earth, I think. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God, and see that, just in case you didn't see my argument, he's going to fill it in for you. God called him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Holy ground. That means it's God's place. God is there. It's time to worship. And you've got to honor God by showing total respect. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Next week we'll pick up, tell the rest of the early life of Moses, and give a brief introduction to Deuteronomy.